I'm
Doesn't
keeping
matter.
that.
It's got hair on it.
He's recording, go.
Okay. Good morning, it is May 15th, 2006 at Pontiac Township High School in Pontiac, Illinois. Today we are interviewing Mr. Neil Bach, who was born on December 19th, 1920. Here, interviewing him today will be myself, Russell Zier, John Haley, and Amy Davis. We are associated with Pontiac High School AP US History class. Mr. Bach served in World War II with the Army Air Corps. His highest rank achieved was sergeant. He served in the 3rd Air Transport Command based in India. Okay, Mr. Bach, how and why did you join the military?
Well, I joined because I was drafted. I tried to enlist at an earlier age, and they turned me down, and later on they accepted me.
Okay. How do you recall your first days in service?
Well, the first days in service are what you would call routine, physicals, shots, and all that kind of thing, indoctrination, and stuff that they did.
Okay. Tell me about the type of training that you had, the boot camp experiences.
Well, we, if you don't mind, I'm going to start out from the time I was inducted and go through some of the facts. I think I was attending Illinois at Wesleyan University in the middle of my junior year. I was inducted to the Army Air Corps at Scottsfield, Illinois on November 2nd, 1942, and took my basic training in St. Petersburg, Florida. I was then sent to the Stevens Hotel in Chicago for 18 weeks of schooling, which had been taken over by the Air Force for training as a radio operator. At this school, we learned to read schematics and wiring diagrams and to repair the radios used in planes. Most importantly, we learned Morse code and to become proficient in its use. From Chicago, I was sent to Las Vegas and Reno, Nevada for training, 8 weeks in B-17s, also called the Flying Fortress, as a flight radio operator. There we went on training flights to practice. We acquired skills with much fights over the Rocky Mountains for reasons that became very clear to us later on. From there I was transferred to Berryfield, Nashville, Tennessee, where a pilot, co-pilot, and I were assigned to a brand new C-46, which is 3 of us pilots crewed to West Palm Beach, Florida. From there we took off in September 1994 to a destination that I knew never existed, the Assam Valley in northeast India. This flight took us over 2/3 of the distance around the world, from the USA to Brazil, to the Ascension Island in the middle of the South Atlantic Ocean, and from there to and across Africa to the Indian Ocean, across that ocean, and from there into India, to the Assam Valley and the village and Air Corps base located at Suprating in the northeast section of the country. Our flight time for the entire trip was 96 hours and took 16 days. We were based at the United States Airfield in Suprating, which was located in the Assam Valley in northeast India. The Assam Valley is bordered on the north and east by Burma and Tibet. The only supply routes to China to furnish the needs of the American and Chinese armed forces were the Lido and Burma roads, which had been carved out of the very mountainous and wild region known in Burma as the Himalaya Mountains, with peaks rising to 16,000 to 18,000 feet. The highest mountain in the world, Mount Everest, is in that range of mountains and rises to 29,000 feet. These range of mountains in the country of Burma, along with the Lido and Burma roads, had been captured by the Japanese in 1942, thus entirely cutting off all lines of support and supplies to China, thereby making it necessary to start an airlift operation. Instead of referring to a range of mountains as the Himalayas, the GI simply referred to them as the hump, thus bringing into the term flying the hump. Now I would like to tell you a little about the living conditions in Suprating. Our base was a large clearing cut and cleared out of the underbrush. The enlisted men were built in a rectangle building made of bamboo with bamboo palm columns as roofs. Others would house 6 men. Ours would house 6 men. In a similar building, but larger, there were latrines and primitive showers and wash basins in which to shave. I am reminded of the time in early morning that I was forced to answer nature's call, so I put on my boots, grabbed my flashlight, and headed for the latrine, which was out in the boonies. When I turned around and flashed my light on the toilet seat, lo and behold, there was a large scorpion about 6 inches long, with a stinger in the air, waiting for me to sit down. I immediately took off my boot, scraped him off the seat, and smashed it with the sole of my boot. And by then I really had to answer nature's call. But to continue, we ate in a large mess hall, which would seat a large number, and we would take our mess kits and go through the line to pick up our food. Food was very basic and as you can visualize, not prepared with much imagination or any attempt to make it attractive. One of the main dinners was chipped beef on toast covered with a pasty brown colored gravy. This soon came to be known universally throughout the services as SH blank blank on a shingle. And you can take it from there. At every meal there were bowls of Atabrin tablets to combat malaria and other bowls containing salt tablets to help prevent dehydration. The monsoon season, rainy season, lasted up to 6 months, and the annual rainfall was well over 120 inches. The temperatures were generally well over 100 degrees. Leeches, insects, and various types of skin diseases were also common. Personnel lived in a world of never completely dry bunks or clothing. It took about 2 weeks for mail to arrive from home, and of course email was unheard of, and there were no telephones for personal use whatsoever. Movies would be available occasionally. Our recreations were primarily playing cards, reading, and shooting the ball with our friends, and of course dreaming and speculating what we could do when we got home. Our job was flying the C-46s over the hump from India over Burma into China, airlifting supplies to the troops stationed there. Since all ground deliveries had been stopped by the Japanese occupations, this was the only way in the world that the fighting could be continued by the Allies to get the supplies over the mountains into China. Our cargo therefore consisted of every imaginable type of material, from jeeps, truck tires, 55-barrel gasolines of high-octane gas, ammunition of various caliber, firearms, toilet paper, you name it, and we had to fly it over. The C-46 aircraft was the largest twin-engine aircraft in the world at that time, and some of the statistics: wingspan was 108 feet, length was 76 feet, range was 1,200 miles, ceiling feet to the highest altitude we could get to was 27,600, although we exceeded that several times. The maximum speed was 269 miles an hour, and the C-46 regulations at gross weight was 48,000 pounds, with an ATC emergency overload listed at 50,000. Many flights were made at even higher weights. The hump, also called the rock pile, was regarded as the most dangerous flying in the world, simply because of the treacherous weather conditions and the formidable mountains below. The navigational instruments were minimal compared to what they are today, and at times the magnetic compass accuracy could vary widely because of weather conditions. So very frequently there were the homecoming beacons at both ends of the trip, and very little in between. Sometimes we could find ourselves flying 100 miles off course. And it was many times you didn't know exactly where you were. While it was hot and sweaty in Assam, it would become bitterly cold in the air. So you several degrees below zero, so you took extra clothes to add as you climbed higher. Fleece-lined flying boots and blankets included. The planes had gasoline-driven heaters which worked most of the time well, but we also often carried a fuel load of on board of high octane gas, and many times those containers leaked. So you never wanted to use an open flame heater and mix it with the fumes from a leaking gas drum. You also put on your gun belt with your Colt 45 along with your trench knife. The Colt came with 3 clips. One with bird shot for finding food. The others were for protection against tigers, other wild animals, and the Japanese, in case we had to bail out, which happened not to us. We were fortunate. And for cutting undergrowth and smaller tree branches. We were told the radio operator who didn't carry a knife, and after landing in tall trees was hanging head down several feet above the ground and swinging free. He used 5 of the 6 shots in a futile attempt to shoot away the harness. When the insects and heat took their toll, he put the final shot in his head. The pilot and co-pilot were officers, and I was a non-commissioned officer. I held the rank of sergeant and was a flight radio operator. My job was to monitor the various radio checkpoints along the particular route we were flying and to inform the pilot if we had strayed from our route due to bad weather conditions. I also monitored the various airfield frequencies to determine if any enemy aircraft were in the vicinity. In case an engine failed while we were carrying a full load, it was my and the co-pilot's job to jettison that load so that we could maintain the altitude necessary to get us over the mountains. This occurred, as I recall, 5 or 6 times in my experiences. The weather on these occasions was always terrible. The plane would pitch and roll, get downdrafts, and overall make it difficult to maintain our balance. We were supposed to wear our chutes and portable oxygen equipment when we were throwing out the material, but it was just too difficult to do so. We just had to be extremely careful that we did not go out the door with the supplies. I would like to quote an excerpt from the book Flying the Hump, written by Captain Downey, an officer on the C-46s. Personally, I can't think of a less desirable position than that of a radio operator in India, working with whatever pilot came along and whatever weather was out there, and drawing far less pay as an enlisted man than the pilots did. However, we were certainly glad to have them aboard, and they took care of a good portion of the workload, and it's kind of nice to be appreciated. On the lighter side, and on many evenings when the reception was clear, we could pick up Tokyo Rose on our radio. She played wonderful up-to-date music from the latest American dance bands and singers and a lot of adverse propaganda. She would say that America was losing the war on all fronts, and that our girlfriends or wives were stepping out on us, that morale was very bad back home, and etc. But we didn't know or care that she was not a single announcer. There were at least a dozen women. One was an American, Iva Toguri, a pre-med school student at the University of California. She had returned to Japan in 1941 to take care of a sick aunt. When authorities would not permit her to return to the U.S., she went to work for Domai, a Japanese news agency. After the war, she was tried and convicted of treason, fined $10,000, stripped of her citizenship, and sentenced to 10 years in prison. In 1976, after 6.5 years in prison, she was pardoned by President General Ford, and as far as I'm concerned, she should have been shot for treason after the trial. The living conditions in China did not concern us, as we spent very little time there. After we delivered our cargo, the plane was serviced, given a mechanical inspection, and the crew had something to eat. Sometimes we spent the night at the base if our takeoff was delayed for some reason. One of the bright spots of the whole thing was at the end of every flight, we went into operations and were given a double shot of whiskey, both in China and India. And after some of the experiences, it was truly appreciated. The landing strips, runways in China were all serviced with crushed rock, all done by hand by the Chinese coolies. And then were further crushed by large rollers, also done by manpower. These runways were very damaging to the plane's tires, and as well as the de-icer boots on the leading edges of the wings, which meant that we were at altitude, planes iced up, that the de-icer boots would not work. So that was an extra problem. On our way into China, we would tune our radio in on the control tower at the airfield we were scheduled to arrive at to see if there were any red ball alerts. One red ball meant that there were an unidentified aircraft in the area. 2 red balls meant there were Japanese in the vicinity. And 3 red balls meant that the field was under direct attack. The control tower would instruct us to continue our landing pattern or divert us to another airfield. We were diverted a number of times. The airfields we most commonly flew into in China were Kunming, Yunnan, and Chengdu. When we first started flying the hump, we were told that we would be rotated stateside after 500 hours of flying. But as the war went on, and because of the lack of qualified crew members, this was extended to 750 hours airtime, and I was through at 753 hours. I had attained the rank of sergeant and was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Air Medal with Cluster, which indicated that I had received the award twice. I was also awarded the Asiatic Pacific Theater of Operations ribbon with 3 battle stars. In my logbook, which contains my flight record with dates, times, and destinations, I wrote the final entry, "That's all, brother," and I meant it. To summarize just a little, I was inducted into the Army Air Corps both in November 2nd, 1942, and after attending basic training on both basic and advanced radio schools, left the U.S. for the Pacific Theater War September 19, 1944. I arrived in India on October 3rd, 1944, and departed Karachi, India, for the way home on the cruise ship USS General Meigs, November 15th, 1945. I arrived in New York City December 3rd, discharged December 15th, and active duty overseas was 1 year, 2 months. After I wrote that, I had some afterthoughts, and so I'm just going to give you a few of those. During our flight training in Reno, we were never instructed about our use of parachutes. In India, it was not uncommon for flight crews to have to bail out over the hump. At that time, we were told if that occurred to jump, count to 10, pull the ripcord for the chute to open. We were then told to find a mountain stream and follow it downstream until we found the village or were found by the natives. If friendly, they would lead us back to the American camp. If then not friendly, we would be turned over to the Japanese, and you never knew what was what until you came across them. A number of crews were never to be heard from again after bailing out. We did wear an American flag sewn on the inside of our flight jackets as identification. The missions were flown 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, regardless of weather conditions. We were all up there at 16,000, 20,000 feet or more on oxygen and trying to get above the weather, generally with no success. The propellers and wings would have ice form on them and then throw it off, thudding against the fuselage. Downdrafts would force the plane to drop as much as 4,000 feet in a few seconds, causing your stomach to drop with it. And the first time I happened, I felt sure those wings would break right off, and we were going, but it didn't happen. They were built very well. Lightning would strike the plane occasionally. Sadam was fire, static electricity would dance around the props and the pilot's windshield, and it sounded like one of our 45 pistols going off in the plane. The hump was a pioneering aviation operation that just about everything worked against it. The forbidding mountains, the worst flying weather in the world, deadly Japanese fighters, the crudest of navigational aids, unproven aircraft, and inexperienced flight and maintenance crews. Military commanders considered a flight over the hump to be more hazardous than a bombing mission over Europe. The hump was closed for one night in all that time that we were flying it. And that was January 6th and 7th, 1945. Weather conditions making it just completely impossible to fly. On the early morning of the 7th, we took off, but after we were in the air for 1 hour, we're ordered to return to our base, which we did gladly. Total flying time was 2 hours and 5 minutes. It was, in my estimation, it was unfortunate. We never flew with the same crew twice. We were assigned a flight on a first in, first out basis. So if we were in first, next time around we went first. And we never became really familiar with our other crew members, and that was too bad. We never developed a true esprit de corps, which I think in the service many times is so important. We were just guys doing a job. We were attached to the bomber group that dropped the atomic bomb on Japan. And in my mind, that was the right and only decision that could have been made. If the Japanese had had the bomb first, there was no question but what they would have used it. We did, and that action saved many thousands of American lives, because we would have had the one that sometime invade Japan, and that would have been very, very costly in lives. And that about sums it up.
Well, thanks, Mr. Bach. You answered a lot of our questions. Going back to the air transport, did you have a specific job that you were that you had to do, or did you do?
I was a flight radio operator.
Okay.
And I had to help with the navigation as far as we had rigor checkpoints that we had to check into, and that was my job to check with them to let them know, first of all, where we were, and second, that we were on course. And we monitored the airports into China to see that they were clear of attacks and that type of thing.
While you were traveling, what were some of your most memorable experiences?
Well, I think getting hit by lightning was one of the first time getting one of the most terrifying, one of the most beautiful and awesome sights that I've ever seen. When the weather was clear, which wasn't very often, and we were flying back to India from China, and the plane had no cargo on it, we could get into an altitude of about pretty close to 30,000 feet. And as I say, Mount Everest was the highest mountain in the world, and when you saw that with the sun shining on it, snow capping its peak, it was one of the most awesome and beautiful sights I've ever seen in my life. I also saw the Taj Mahal. I was on rest leave for 4 or 5 days, and I saw the Taj Mahal in Accra, India, which was a beautiful white temple, worthwhile seeing. Other than that, our lives were pretty dull.
Do you think you can explain some of the medals and awards that you received? And
Oh yeah.
like to show them?
Mm-hmm. First of all, this is a plane that we flew. It's not a very good picture, but
You want me to?
Here's a plane.
and these were this was the Distinguished Flying Cross. This was the Air Medal with cluster. There's a little cluster in the center, which meant that I was awarded twice. And this was the Asiatic Theater of War ribbon with the 3 battle stars. And my air crew member wings, we were attached to the 20th Bomber Command, which, as I said, was the one that bombed Japan, and my sergeant stripes, and then a couple of other ribbons that were kind of routine.
Were you able to keep in touch with your family?
As I say, our mail came about very sporadically, and every 2 to 3 weeks, and that's the only contact we had.
Did you guys ever have the opportunity to pull some pranks on people?
Well, we did a lot of horsing around, and, among ourselves in the barracks. But as I say, we just didn't have got to know a lot of people in the outfit because of that first in, first out basis, and it was not the ideal situation from that standpoint.
What did you do after your service ended?
I went back and graduated from Illinois Wesleyan. Got married. We moved to Chicago I graduated from, I went to my senior year in high school in Pontiac Township High School first. I came from Champaign, Urbana. And then after the service, I finished up my education at Wesleyan, got married. We moved to Chicago, where I worked as a radio buyer for Spiegel Incorporation, which was at that time a large mail order house. And came back to Pontiac, got a job in the bank of Pontiac, and retired as president of the bank.
Okay. How did your service and experiences affect your life?
Very deeply. It's hard to put into words, but it was an experience that at times was terrifying when you went through it, but I would never change it for anything. It built character, no question about that. And we did meet some awfully nice guys who we bunked with, and all of them pretty much the same range of, life. And but it was an experience that I don't regret having done.
That's all the questions we have. Is there anything else that you would like to cover that we haven't asked?
I think I've said it all as far as I'm concerned.
Well, it was nice talking to you, and thank you for volunteering your time to come and interview.
Well, thank you.
Hopefully we'll see you later.
I think you people are doing a wonderful job in doing this type of thing, because the facts get lost in time. And it's just like now when they are trying to do a revision of the Holocaust, which we know happened, but now some churches and individuals are denying that it ever happened. And I think it's important that for history that the truth be known in all of these events.
All right, well, thank you.
You betcha. Thank you.